Hi, thanks for coming to my channel. So firstly, just a quick um, apologies, so to speak. My last video was a little bit disjointed, um, not very structured. It was just ongoing. I was talking about the second Trump impeachment, and the news was developing in the background, and I kind of wanted to keep an eye on that, but I didn't really want to upload it again. So apologies if that was a bit distracting, but I think I got the gist of what I want to say there. Um, And actually, the fact that so much news has been on American politics recently, understandable as that is, because it has been an extraordinary week in American politics, even in the turbulent Trump era. Um, Understandable as that is, we shouldn't lose sight of some other important things going on in the world. Yesterday, the UK had its highest single death toll from coronavirus since this crisis began. Over 1,500 people. But that's even worse than any day during the height of the virus last year. We've now had a total of at least 85,000 people have died. The worldwide toll is at least 1,830,000 people. The true toll is going to be a lot higher than that. I suspect it's somewhere around the 2.5 million mark. I say that as a very loose speculation, just judging from the fact that countries that have been pretty open, countries that are not open like China, which we'll be talking about in a minute. I just think it's absurd to think that China, with 1.4 billion people, has had just 4,800 deaths from COVID. I think that is, even the most optimistic scenario, I think that is extremely implausible when a much smaller country like Belgium has had, I don't know what the Belgian toll is at the moment, but last time I checked Worldometer, it was at least 11,000. So, um, the most recent development with this that I want to talk about is something that really should be, in my opinion, given a lot more attention than it has been. And it's this. I just get it's an article in the Times here. I mean, honestly, I tried getting a link to this online, and there was um, very scant information other than a rebuke by the director of the World Health Organization, Tedros, Adnan Ghebreyesus. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Ghebreyesus. Okay, so the WHO team that was sent to China to investigate the origins of coronavirus were sent back at the last minute. Their visas were refused. I'll just read out the first few paragraphs from this Times article. This is from the 7th of January, so this is actually last week. Maybe that's why I couldn't find a fresh report on it, because I'm a bit behind in my newspapers. But anyway, the reports by DD Time. An international investigation into the origins of the coronavirus was in disarray last night after China reneged on an agreement and prevented the team of World Health Organization experts from entering the country. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, said he was very disappointed that China had failed to admit the 10-strong mission, some of whom were en route there when they learned that they would not be given visas allowing them to work. After months of talks, the team had been due to arrive this week to try to establish how and where the virus jumped from animals to humans. It was due to be led by Peter Ben Mbarak, the organization's top expert on animal diseases that cross species, who went to China on a preliminary mission in July. We were all operating on understanding the team would begin deploying today, Michael Ryan, the WHO Emergencies Director, said. He emphasized the absolute critical nature of the mission and said the situation was frustrating and disappointing. China is determined to control the origin story of the virus, which has killed more than 1.8 million people worldwide and laid waste to global economies. The first cases of the coronavirus were recorded in the central Chinese city of Wuhan in late 2019, prompting accusations that the secretive handling of the outbreak by the Chinese authorities led to its internal spread. President Trump has called the pandemic the China virus, and Matthew Pottinger, his deputy national security advisor, told politicians last week there was growing evidence that it may have originated from a supposedly secure virus laboratory in Wuhan. Beijing has been sensitive to allegations that it was to blame for the virus. Well, of course it is. A foreign ministry spokeswoman confirmed that the WHO team had not been admitted, saying the delay was not just a visa issue and that there had been a misunderstanding. Um, so they're not denying it. They're not denying that they've turned away the WHO team, but of course they're denying everything else. The Chinese Communist Party is not only brutal, it's also cowardly. Um, they're world-class liars. They're professional liars. They revel in lying. They've lied to their own people for 70 years, 71 years actually. So it really shouldn't be surprising that they lied to the world. Let's not forget when this thing began. Doctors like Li Wenliang, and there were others. He became famous, unfortunately, because he died young, and he was one of the whistleblowers. But there were others, and there were citizen journalists who were punished. Wuhan residents who lost loved ones have subsequently been told to basically shut up and not talk about how they've been treated. The entire narrative of the Chinese regime is to boast about how well they've handled this. But here's my thing. That's what communist regimes do. Uh, to me, this is vile, dishonest, brutal, lying, horrible dictatorship. I've never minced my words about the Chinese Communist Party, but that's what they are. That's what they do. Their only interest is power and saving face. They don't care about human beings. They never have. So that's what they are. That's what they do. We can't say we didn't know. I think the real issue here is how we respond to it. And there's, of course, other things going on. There's the way the Uyghurs are being treated. I don't think anyone with a straight face can say that there isn't mass persecution of the Uyghur people. Even if you don't accept the term genocide, and I think there is ground for that in terms of genocide being defined as a deliberate attempt to destroy a people and a culture. Um, disgracefully this week they were talking about liberating women as being baby making machines. That was their excuse for the way they're treating Uyghur women. But even if you disregard that, look at what's happened in Hong Kong. Look at the mass arrests, um, the absolute crackdown on Hong Kong's autonomy. Um, Look at its wolf warrior diplomacy, the way it tries to bully other countries like Australia. Although I would say Australia is not easily bullied, by shackling Australia's wine industry, by stoking up nationalism abroad. Um, Here's the thing. I think the responsibility is not just on governments. So I am pleased that Dominic Raab has taken quite a hard line. I think Mike Pompeo's been outspoken. I give him credit for that on issues like religious freedom and support for Taiwan. It's one of the very few positive aspects of the Trump era, I have to say. Um, so yeah, governments certainly have responsibility. Western governments, any government for that matter, that understands the China threat needs to be assertive on this. But I don't think it's just governments. I can see other powerful bodies that are sitting on the fence or openly pandering to China. I'll give a few examples. Ofcom. Ofcom's Britain's media regulator. I'm furious with Ofcom, quite frankly, because they have the power to determine who broadcasts in this country. Now, I take the view that if a broadcaster has engaged in forced confessions, as CGTN has, this is a Chinese state broadcaster, they shouldn't be allowed to operate on our shore. Yet they have offices in East Chiswick, excuse me, West Chiswick in London. I don't see any rational reason why they are breaking British journalistic ethical standards. Ofcom's given them vague warnings, but as far as I'm concerned, they've been weak. Ofcom's sitting on the fence. They can use their jargon. This is kind of personal for me because I launched a petition and I've been in exchanges with Ofcom over this. They claim that, they get into all their jargon about we will review the situation, we are minded to take action. It's all hot air. They haven't done a damn thing. So I'm furious with Ofcom. I think they're showing weakness. They have the power to remove the license and they just won't do it. I'd like to know why they're procrastinating. What excuse are they looking at? They have this lily-livered, pathetic, sitting on the fence attitude. Oh, well, we need to hear the Chinese government side. Well, the Chinese government won't let anyone else have a say. That's what's so pathetic and cowardly about Ofcom's attitude. They seem to think there's an equilibrium here. It's a David and Goliath situation. Ofcom doesn't acknowledge that. So I'm furious with Ofcom, quite frankly. Now, that's only one factor. CGTN probably has a minimal influence in the UK, but to me, it's a principle of it. It's a principle of it. Our university departments is another example. China departments across the country are so keen to get Chinese investment that they, in my opinion, turn a blind eye to the undermining tactics that Beijing is very clearly engaged in. This includes riling up Chinese students to bully critics. There have been verifiable examples, for example, of Hong Kong students getting threats from mainland students. This sort of bullying and intimidation is going on in our campuses. More recently, the narrative has been that Chinese students have been the victims of xenophobia. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, and I'm not justifying it. There's no excuse to give someone a hard time just because they're Chinese. However, if they're going to be apologists for the Chinese regime, then frankly, they've no right to complain. I do take quite a dogged view on this. I saw a BBC report recently where Chinese Australians were talking about being stigmatized. My message to them as an observer would be, in my opinion, I understand your frustration. You shouldn't be discriminated against or feel like you're being discriminated against just simply because of your ethnicity. But silence speaks volumes. If you fail to condemn what China is doing and you're of Chinese heritage, people are going to jump to conclusions. Rightly or wrongly, that's what they're going to do. Also, I would point out that you can't blame Australian society for that. You get idiot racists everywhere, right? There's no excuse for that attitude, but you get that everywhere. The problem is not Australian society. The problem is that the Chinese communist regime is trying to undermine Western democracies. I've seen one person say this is a new yellow peril. So they're trying to compare it to the jingoism of the Chester Arthur years. We're going back here to the 1880s with the notorious China Exclusion Act. Now, the situation could not be more different. That was just blatant racial discrimination. At that time, China was a very poor country. That discriminated against Chinese railway builders. These were people who built America. There were some awful massacres. They were treated very badly at that time. That's a world of difference between the current situation in which we are talking about a rising superpower. It could surpass the United States within a decade economically, and where there is very real empirical evidence of undermining techniques going on um, to undermine Western institutions. Now, I don't want to get into conspiracy theory territory and say that the Chinese government is, in control of every Western institution. I don't think it's quite got to that level, but anyone that thinks there isn't something going on here, this isn't conspiracy theories. There is empirical evidence for this. Um, but I think the fact that they have turned back this World Health Organization team, Tedros and the WHO, they themselves are guilty of pandering to China. They did it at the start of the outbreak. They pandered to the false narrative of how well the Beijing regime has handled this. They haven't handled it well. Um, I do not for a second believe that less than 5,000 people is a true death toll. They have punished whistleblowers. They've covered it up. They've tried to blackmail other countries with PPE. And yes, it's true that there are new strains from Brazil and South Africa and indeed the UK. regardless, regardless of anything else, it must never ever be forgotten this began in China. And it began, I believe, for a range of factors, not least the failure to properly legislate those wet markets. I've seen those wet markets, they're filthy. It's absolutely no surprise. You don't need to be a virologist to, it's just a matter of common sense that if you have unsanitary conditions, at some point that could potentially cause an outbreak. Um, that's happened even on a much smaller scale in the UK and in other countries. So it really shouldn't be surprising. Um, but summed up, this surely is yet another reminder of why it simply cannot be business as usual with Beijing. I really do want to see the Chinese regime polarized. I really do. I don't think they have many genuine friends in this world. North Korea, Pakistan, Russia on some level, but genuine allies, I don't think China has many. It's very good at throwing its weight around, and there's no question it is assertive and powerful right now. And when we look at the crisis in the United States, all that does is this is why I get frustrated with, for example, Hong Kong democracy activists who really blow the horn for Trump and keep talking about conspiracy theories. That I remind them that all that does is play into the CCP's hands. Um, Biden needs to be tough on China. If he's weak, that would be unforgivable. Unforgivable. The EU has went into grubby trade deals. That's unforgivable. You know, to the extent that they're doing at this time. We have now left the EU, so if it really is about taking back control, we need to prove that by standing up to China. We can't do it alone, but I believe certainly the Five Eyes, which the Beijing regime claims that they're going to poke our eyes out. Well, it isn't just the Five Eyes. That's what China needs to understand. They have very few friends in this world because of their behavior over the last 2 years. Um, I think a lot of people are willing to turn a blind eye to human rights in China, which is very sad. But this pandemic has affected everyone. And I do think a lot of people are very wary about the rise of China. But they're very arrogant right now, very confident. And I just think historically it would be absolutely unforgivable if we do not take a tough stand. China rises, and I don't even want to think about what that could mean in terms of, for example, control of the internet. There are still some incredibly foolish people in powerful positions who think it should be business as normal, who think that we can have good relations in the current context. I don't believe we can. I'm not saying let's start a Cold War. I'm saying the Chinese regime has already started it. I just think that we need to take a much tougher stance. If that means, um, if that means, for example, expelling the new ambassador, the last guy, I forget his name now, he was very outspoken and done a lot more interviews than Chinese ambassadors usually do. So became fairly famous in his time as ambassador to the UK. But his successor, if this wolf warrior BS continues, we need to take a hard line and say we're not going to be pushed around. We're not going to be insulted. How long is the world going to tolerate the Chinese regime behaving this way? That's what I'd like to know. And I always make this caveat in these videos. Some people will say I'm a xenophobe. I'm not. I love China. That is the land of China. I love Chinese culture. Um, I want good relations on a people to people basis. I don't want discrimination against Chinese students or legitimate business people or tourists when all of this is over. But I think it would be the height of stupidity and unforgivable weakness if we do not really, really get assertive. And it isn't just the government. Ofcom has frankly been gutless on this. I have very hard views on that because I see it. I see Ofcom doing nothing. It's all hot air. And they have the power to do it. This isn't that their hands are tied, that they can't do it. They can, because they stripped the license of STV, which was Iran's broadcaster. So they can do it. Ofcom has the power to grant or take away licenses. So why are they allowing a network that airs forced confessions? Why? It's unforgivable. And university departments that pander to Beijing without a word. I'm not suggesting that they need to make some big protest, but at the very least, they need to review the situation. I think we're too overly reliant on China. We act as if they're the only country that we can, for example, trade with on digital technology. It's not. I think we should look much. I was encouraged by the trade deal with Japan recently, South Korea. Um, there's a whole lot of emerging economies. They might not be as big as China, but cumulatively, I think there's a lot of potential there. Why do we need to rely so much on China? This is the thing. There's this assumption that because China is a huge economy, because it's rising, it's just this unstoppable beast. It's not. No country has had absolute power. Even the British Empire at its peak had tests to its authority. So no power ever has been absolute, absolute, absolute. You know, I really do think that China has some weaknesses. I think there's internal contentions and divisions that are maybe growing, but of course are being there's a suppression of that information. Certainly, the party's on overdrive to promote nationalism. That's what they always do when they feel cornered. So at the moment, they're under a lot of scrutiny over coronavirus. So they play up the nationalism card to the domestic base. They might get away with it within China, but it should be absolutely unacceptable in other countries. So I really think the next ambassador, whoever he or she is, if they play the wolf warrior game and disrespect us, if they lie through their teeth, we need to actually look at expelling them, like we've done with the Russians after Salisbury. Why not? Really, why not? And finally, to Chinese people who might be watching this and they're really defensive, I stand by everything I've said. Just remember that whilst you can watch my video freely and you can counter it if you want, you can disagree, critics of Beijing can't do that in China. So there is absolutely no way that you could compare China to the West in terms of fairness. I don't think that there's any comparison, even despite things going on right now. There's no comparison. There's simply no tolerance of dissent in China. And anyone that says there is a liar. Because the main religion in China is nationalism. It's not even communism, it's nationalism. It's this ugly, jingoistic Sino nationalism that I really think the world needs to wake up to. I want good relations on a people to people basis, but I don't think we should tolerate nationalistic insults. I really don't. And I'll leave it there. That's my candid thoughts. Thanks for watching.